So welcome to Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. My name is Paula Gloria, and this is going to be part 2 about the nuclear war that Bush is courting with Iran. And we have on the line our favorite guest, which is Webster Tarpley. He's the author of 9/11 Synthetic Terror. He predicted a long time ago that unless 9/11 truth was achieved, we would have a lot of problems in the world. So thank you, Webster, for joining us. And can we carry on with what you said yesterday?
Well, let me try to. I guess on our last program, we tried to give a broader view of the world implications of the coming U.S. nuclear sneak attack on Iran under the pretext of nuclear weapons on the part of Iran. And, of course, there's no proof of any Iranian nuclear program. We're dealing once again with the neocon, Goebbels-style, big lie propaganda offensive, just like before the Iraq War. And it's time that people learned their lesson on that. We tried to show how a U.S. nuclear sneak attack on Iran will lead to the end of the world as we've known it, the very severe undermining of world civilization and the return to a context of international anarchy, regional war in the Middle East, increasing hostility between the United States on the one side, Russia, China, and a series of other countries on the other, possibly leading there to nuclear war in its own right. In other words, the nuclear war starts with the U.S. nuking Iran, but the end game of it may well be a general nuclear exchange among U.S., Russia, China, and possibly others. And we tried to go through some of that. Also, economic breakdown crisis, a certain end to the dollar, the end of the death agony of the dollar in a total collapse of the dollar, plus cyber warfare, plus other things that we possibly can't even imagine. So the end of world civilization as we've known it. Now, it ought to be important enough for people to do something to avoid that. For your own sake and for the sake of your children, it's very important right now to enter a phase of activism and to do this personally. In other words, to mobilize yourself to the degree that you can and try to exercise war avoidance and to fight for what amounts to world peace, for peaceful coexistence of the various states that exist in the world today, and possibly beyond that, some form of positive economic cooperation. But the main thing has to be the mobilization to drive the neocon fascist madmen out of politics, to essentially paralyze the Bush administration and prevent them from doing the things that they're obviously planning. Now, we have to start from the fact that it is an advantage that the Democratic Party has now got control of the House and the Senate, because this at least gives some purchase, some ability to influence the events in the Congress. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the first month of the Democratic Congress has been a tragic and catastrophic failure. On the one hand, we have the parliamentary cretinism of Mrs. Pelosi. People are getting killed in Iraq at the rate of hundreds and thousands a day. The U.S. is losing GIs at a very high rate. And Mrs. Pelosi has now let 1 month go by and has not passed a resolution strongly condemning the Iraq war and demanding an end to it, to say nothing of condemning this escalation or surge. Similarly, that has meant that in the Senate, the forces around Republican Senator Warner, who I regard as a figure of great duplicity, have been able to muddy the waters with their resolutions, which simply says we condemn the surge, but we don't condemn the war. As a matter of fact, we guarantee that we're going to keep funding the war. And this is obviously absolutely inadequate. So the question, therefore, is what can we do? First of all, let's think about the strategy, the method of what we do, and then we'll look at the tactics in a minute. The strategy has to be something like this. If you look at Bush's escalation speech, you'll see that he predicates and bases everything he does on the 9/11 myth. He says at one point something like, we saw on September 11th, 2001, what it can be like if a country becomes the haven for terrorists, and we can't let that happen again. Therefore, we must succeed in Iraq. The very next day, Rush Limbaugh obedient to the Karl Rove talking points that come out of the White House by fax, was spouting about 9/11 and the casualties of 9/11 and how tragic this was, and that this was the basis for the war in Iraq, which it is. Senator Lieberman on Meet the Press a couple of days later talked about September 11th not once but twice, so much so that he offended a number of the other senators that he was talking with. And then finally, Cheney in an interview said, if you don't support the war in Iraq, you're playing into the hands of Bin Laden and Al Qaeda and the terrorists. So always the reference to this myth. In the State of the Union, it's very, very interesting and to look at the State of the Union. I won't try to go through quotations here, but you'll see that there's about 1/3 of it, which is complete nightmare vision of September 11th applied to the world of 5 years later, about that September morning and 5 years have gone by, and then the lessons of September 11th are that we must persist in Iraq to the point of total final victory and stay the course and all the rest of it. So we've got to realize that the basis of this war policy, be it Afghanistan, be it Iraq, be it Iran, be it China or Venezuela, they're all going to be based on this September 11th myth, which is, of course, a racist, fascist, militarist myth. Now, in my work, I have systematically deconstructed, dismantled this myth. What is understood as September 11th is not, never was, an attack by an independently existing Arab Islamic network, Al Qaeda, whatever this is. It's a complete fairy tale. This is a myth, a big lie, a monstrous deception, a bogus sham by the Anglo-American propaganda apparatus. It was, of course, just like the blowing up of the Maine, just like the Gulf of Tonkin, just like so many other incidents that have set off wars from Sarajevo down to the present day. It was a provocation, cynically planned, in this case, by the CIA, by the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Special Forces Command, the Pentagon, and other agencies of the U.S. government, with help from private military firms, run under the aegis of drills and exercises, and conducted according to the well-known methods of false flag synthetic terrorism. And the goal of this was to attempt to save the U.S., British, world empire, world domination through a series of wars of civilization. And this all fits into the neocon philosophy of the world based on Carl Schmitt, Hitler's lawyer, based on Leo Strauss, the protege of Carl Schmitt, and the notions that that you must have an enemy image in order to organize a society that's as unjust as the one that we live in. So the question then is, 9/11 is the basis of everything. Now, if we look at the polling, we can see that the support for Bush right now oscillates around 1/3. It's about usually between 30 and 32, 33% of the electorate will say that they approve of Bush's plan for Iraq. If you say to them, do you support an escalation in Iraq, 12% say they support it. But as soon as you put in Bush and say, do you support the president's approach to Iraq, then it gets up to about 1/3. And this is a very chilling statistic because it means that all the agitation of the peace movement and others has fundamentally failed to break into Bush's hardcore base. And I think that's what we've got to look at. And the reason for that is anything serious that you want to do in terms of war avoidance requires 2/3 plus X, in particular of the Senate and sometimes of the House of Representatives. Now, in the House of Representatives, you might be able to get to 2/3 plus X under certain circumstances. It's going to be hard, but in the Senate, it's much, much harder. Because remember, all those rural red states, all those places in the South, all those places in the Intermountain West, all those relatively backward areas, frankly, are where these people are concentrated. In other words, the Bush base is geographically concentrated in a series of southern and rural states that allows that voting bloc to stop things from going through the Senate. And this, of course, is critical. If you want to impeach Bush, It's obviously absolutely essential to impeach Bush and Cheney and Rice and Gonzalez and a series of others, plus some people on the Supreme Court we can talk about. But if you want to do that, you've got to get half of the House, but then you've got to get two-thirds of the Senate. And right now, you're nowhere near two-thirds of the Senate. As we've seen in the past couple of days, we don't even have yet the ability to force a debate in the Senate. We can't even get to 60 votes in the Senate. We can't even get to 50 votes in the Senate under the current circumstances. So if you want them to cut off the funding for the war, absolutely essential. Bush will veto that bill, of course. So if you want to have a modern equivalent of the Cooper Church resolution bill, which cut off the funding for the war in Cambodia, or the famous Hatfield-McGovern amendment, which cut off the funding for Vietnam itself, you've got to get two-thirds of the House, two-thirds of the Senate. You're nowhere near either one. And finally, suppose you want to have Bush declared insane. You might imagine the situation where half of the cabinet, worried about their own necks and their own political futures, would vote to declare Bush insane and have him thrown out as president. But if Bush says, no, I'm not insane, then you've got to have two-thirds of the House and two-thirds of the Senate vote that he is insane. So your question, therefore, is how do you get to two-thirds plus X? And I would say the tactic so far used by the peace agitators and the peace movement will not be effective. And the reason for this is the one-third of the electorate that keeps supporting Bush are people who have accepted and bought into the nightmare vision of September 11th. The notion that there is an independently existing Arab Muslim terror organization that wants to come to the United States and kill them on the model of 9/11, but now with weapons of mass destruction, suitcase nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons, all of this being brought in to kill them. They believe this. They believe that this is an independent force. Of course, in reality, it is not independent. These are provocations that are set up by the intelligence agencies for political purposes. But you've got to somehow break into that. So therefore, the critical question is, can you attrit and erode Bush's base by convincing and showing and proving to a significant part of that one-third of support that he retains that it's not the world they think it is, but it's a world where the terrorism comes from their own government and not from a foreign force. And again, when you begin to get Bush down to 25 or 20 or 15, then you begin to get to the area where you can actually do something to impeach Bush, to stop the war, to have him declared insane, or whatever else the goal may be. And therefore, this means that the September 11th question, as I've outlined it in my book, and the fact that this is a provocation by the U.S. intelligence community, has to take the leading edge of everything else you do. Now, does that seem to make sense? Is there any part of that that's not watertight?
No, that makes sense. It's just very, very hard for people to believe that institutions that they think protect them were actually the ones that caused the terror, and that it's like you say in your book, because I'm pointing the camera right at your book, that it was made in the USA. That's hard.
Well, people have to wake up. Again, people who can remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. That was the basis of the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, when the Congress was stampeded in the wake of that. And that was officially admitted now in the autumn of 2005 that that was a fraud, that was essentially made up, that there were no North Korean torpedo boat attacks on the U.S. destroyers involved, and therefore the U.S. bombing of North Vietnam that began then was without basis. Hitler started the war in Poland with Operation Canned Meat. He got some of his own, he got convicts, killed them and dressed them up in German uniforms, spread them around a radio station and accused the Poles of staging a raid. Sarajevo, blowing up of the heir to the Austrian throne, done by British intelligence with Russian intelligence and Serbian intelligence and others. The blowing up of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor from the inside of the boat, not from the outside by a Spanish mine, but from the inside, some kind of an explosive charge by somebody who wanted to have the Spanish-American War and found the U.S. empire. So people have just got to wake up for this. Now, you know, there's a question in evolution. If a species is so stupid that it can't survive, then it doesn't survive. And that is really the question posed by these questions here. If you say, well, that's a conspiracy theory and I won't believe it, then you may be so dumb and so stupid that you are not able to survive given the actual threats and the nature and structure of evil in the present day world. So here's what I would recommend. What can individual people do? Obviously, you have to educate yourself. I'd recommend reading my book. That's why I wrote it. It was to educate a generation of activists that 9/11 had been a fraud, and precisely how. So get that, read it. There's all sorts of other things. If that's too much for you, you can sort of slide into it through Loose Change or the 9/11 Mysteries or any number of other means. You can go on the internet. There are all sorts of websites, 9/11 Truth, many others. So get into that. Now, the first thing you ought to do is campaign to take back the airwaves. We did this in July and August, in particular with the 9/11 Truth movement. But what you've got to do is take these great poobahs, the Limbaughs, the Hannitys, the O'Reillys, and their local versions, right? The little right-wing extremists, the sort of second and third-rate fascist parrots who parrot all this nonsense. The people who essentially glorify violence and racism, who call for the killing of Arabs and Muslims and so forth. It's time to go right into their parlor and simply point out that the 9/11 myth, a racist, militarist, fascist myth, is now being used to prepare a world war which is going to lead to the destruction of the United States and the world as we've known it. And it's just that simple. And people have to wake up to that fact, and you've got to get in there and mix it up and fight and change the climate of public opinion as it's reflected in the airwaves. Anybody can do this. There's no reason to sit home and agonize about the fate of the world. When you can pick up a phone, and if you have to wait for a while, you'll have to wait. But get on some large radio program and put out the word. Now, in particular, though, it's 2007. We have opportunities this year that we didn't have last year and we won't have next year. And this is the era of retail politics. You've now got a presidential campaign going on. It's an extremely chaotic one. This is a very big advantage for us. It cannot be controlled. If the citizenry decides that it should not be controlled, it will not be controlled, despite the fact that people like Hillary Clinton and Edwards and others are going to try to proceed in a bubble through these primaries. They won't be able to do it. We've essentially got the New Hampshire primary. We've got the Iowa caucuses. We've got the South Carolina primary. We've got the Nevada primary. Plus we've got, if you happen to be in Manhattan, of course, you're in heaven, because you've got people like Hillary Clinton and Giuliani running around all the time, people coming to New York for various reasons. It's time to essentially go out and talk to them. Mrs. Clinton said, let's chat. Let the conversation begin. Let's have a dialogue. Well, indeed, let's. Let's talk about the 9/11 report. Let's talk about why it's a fraud. Let's talk about how the attacks were run under the cover of drills. Let's talk about Angel is Next. Let's talk about the cynicism of using this to start World War III. So let us accept the invitation that we have from these wonderful populist candidates to break through their bubbles and ask them the questions that they obviously don't want to hear. The way that I recommend, and of course this is what you can do in this era of retail politics. Essentially, it really comes down to the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucus, where they've got to go out and mix with the little people. If you go to those states, they have to go to cafeterias, barber shops, workplaces, old folks' homes, or just walk up and down the street. And you can find some version of that in some other places too. But the main idea, therefore, is what I call 9/11 truth squads. In other words, since the debate is on, we wish to enter the debate. What you need to do is get three people. Two people have questions. One question, one follow-up. Third person has a camcorder or a cell phone. We've been told by Time Magazine, we're the persons of the year. We determine the content of the new media. Everybody saw how the fate of the United States Senate was determined by the macaca moment. The macaca moment came when the guy with a camcorder was filming the racist Confederate Senator Allen of Virginia when he went into a racist tirade. That was all captured on film, and that was the destruction of Allen, and that was how the Virginia seat went to the Democrats and the Republicans lost the Senate. Now, it's maybe not as much as we should have gotten out of it, but at least that much was very important. So the macaca moment is within reach. Let's look at some of these candidates. Hillary Clinton is a warmonger. She's trying right now very hard, out of deference to the incensed anti-war base of the Democratic Party, she's trying to pretend to be less of a warmonger than she really is. But she is a dyed-in-the-wool warmonger. She went from a meeting of AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Council in New York City. One day, she said, we've got to be ready to attack Iran. Take no option off the table vis-a-vis Iran. We are going to confront Iran. To the next day at the Democratic National Committee in Washington, D.C., where she said, I will end the war in Iraq. So she wants to have war with Iran, but get out of Iraq. Not a position that makes very much sense, Mrs. Clinton. Plus, of course, she is the high priestess of the racist, fascist, militarist 9/11 myth. It's the basis of all of her campaigning. So she needs to be confronted on those issues. Now, just let me say parenthetically, we're setting up a website. It takes us a while because we don't have foundation funding. 911truthsquads.com. 911truthsquads.com will offer you a general idea of how to do this stuff, plus profiles of the various candidates, specific questions to ask each one. The main thing with Mrs. Clinton is that she's obviously got, she's a very studied approach to campaigning. She's obviously full of rage, and the rage may break out at various times. Although she's reported to be full of rage and venom in her personal life. And if that came out in public on these issues, then that would be obviously very good. Mayor Giuliani, the most important candidate from the point of view of 9/11, because he's Mr. 9/11. He's going to run on that. Well, the question for Mayor Giuliani is, Mayor, on that morning between 11 o'clock and noon, you were sitting in your so-called command center in Building 7 of the World Trade Center. You received notification that the two towers were going to collapse. Absolutely unprecedented event. No skyscraper has ever collapsed. It was controlled demolition. In effect, Mayor, you were being told in advance that the controlled demolition of the towers was about to occur and that you had to get out of there and save yourself. How about the office workers who were told to stay in the towers? How about the cops? How about the firemen who died because they never got the notification that you got? Mayor, why did you get that notification at all, and why did you get it and it was denied to the people who died in the towers? Second question for Giuliani is, after the fact, you were Mr. Scoop and Dump. You essentially said the only issue is to clear this up as soon as possible. We don't care about the human remains of the people who died in these buildings. We're going to get all of this out of here. We're going to send it to Fresh Kills. We're going to send it to China. We're going to melt it down. Now, obviously, there's more here than a cynical bureaucrat who wants to show that he's efficient, bad as that is. This is somebody who wants to destroy a crime scene. He's got to melt down those beams so we don't see the telltale marks of the thermite and the other components of controlled demolition on the steel components. They've got to be sent to China and come back in the form of paper clips. The evidence is destroyed. Mayor Giuliani is a felon. He violated the National Transportation Safety Board legislation, which says if there's an air crash in the United States, that area's got to be cordoned off. There's got to be a thorough analysis of it done by the NTSB, and if you go in there and touch any piece of that wreckage, that's a federal felony. You are rounded up. You go to jail. So that's where Giuliani should be going. Now, those 2 points obviously supplemented with the rest of his record, well known to New Yorkers, right, the dictatorial style and everything else. But there are plenty of other places where you can get that. If we look at somebody like Edwards, he's obviously a snake oil salesman. He voted for the war. He just gave a communique to the Herzliya conference in Israel, where he too went through the routine of he's going to be ready to attack Iran. He won't take anything off the table with regard to Iran. So same story with Edwards. If we then look at McCain, McCain is obviously a madman. McCain is the most obviously mentally ill of all of these candidates, and that's going some. He is obviously always on the verge of what amounts to a nervous breakdown. Ariana Huffington says that she tried to talk to him at Davos and that he began raving. And she actually wrote in her blog there on the Huffington Post, if you go to McCain and ask him some questions he doesn't like, and if you have a camcorder, you're going to get that short fuse moment on there, and that may be his macaca moment. So, the macaca moment for McCain. He was for rogue state rollback. He was for attacking third world countries in 2000, before there was any 9/11, and he's just gotten worse since. He's, of course, the most associated with the lunatic desire to escalate the war with Iraq. And on 9/11, he wrote the odious preface to the Popular Mechanics attempt to defend the official version of 9/11 against all the cogent and well-founded criticisms that have been brought up against it. So, in a sense, McCain is trying to outbid Giuliani as being the candidate most identified with the defense of the 9/11 myth. Then you've got somebody like Obama. Obama is essentially a blank slate. However, if you do go and do the research, as people at antiwar.com and elsewhere have done, you will find that Obama's public statements, even though he makes a big deal of the fact that he didn't want the Iraq war, he is very much in favor of the global war on terrorism, which essentially means then you're embracing the 9/11 myth. And then he's also in favor of the hardline vis-a-vis Iran and the rest of it. So then we'll have those quotes up for people to see, because Obama has obviously got to be probed about this, and if he wants to repudiate the 9/11 myth, he should do it. All of these candidates have got to be confronted with the obvious fact that the Kane-Hamilton 9/11 Commission was a tissue of lies, fabrications. It should not be sanctified in the form of law. It should be thrown out, and a new independent investigation has to be brought in. And, of course, we know that Kane and Hamilton, to take the most dramatic fact, they write in their own book 5 years after the fact that when they were having their commission, they knew that NORAD generals and Pentagon generals were committing perjury, blatantly lying to their commission about various aspects, the timelines, but also other aspects of the suppression of air defense, the deliberate suppression of all air defense over that corridor in North America for 1 hour and 45 to 1 hour and 50 minutes on September 11th. Those generals were the witting parties to a coup d'etat and to a terrorist fabrication inside this country. They're guilty of high treason. What did Kane Hamilton do? They said, oh, it's clear they're committing perjury. Should we do anything? Oh, no, we don't want to do that. It might upset the country. We'll just slough that off onto the inspectors general of these various departments. So there's also the meeting of George Tenet with Condoleezza Rice covered up, the entire Abel Danger revelations covered up, plus other perjury by Ashcroft.
We have 40 seconds, Webster.
So basically what people have got to do is get out there, 2 people, each one with a question follow-up, the third person with a camera, 9/11 Truth Squads, 911truthsquads.com. Go out and get into the primary debate. It's not civil disobedience. There's no reason why you should be arrested. This is simply a right as a citizen to question candidates about the main issues of our time. And do it now, because the attack on Iran is now a matter of 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks at the very most.